Welcome to Muffin Talk.
Kia ora and welcome to Muffin Talk. This program is brought to you by the initiative Titipounamu, Study and Joy. My guest today is Dr. Joe Grayland. Kia ora, Joe, and warm welcome. Haere mai to Muffin Talk.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Beata.
Dr. Joe Grayland is an assistant lecturer in the Department of Liturgy at the University of Würzburg in Germany. He has been a priest of the Catholic Diocese of Palmerston North in New Zealand for more than 30 years. While in Palmerston North, he wrote a column called Pastor's Desk, Liturgical Formation and Celebration. Father Joe is currently based in Germany, as I said, and has recently experienced the German Katholikentag, the Catholic's Day. The Katholikentag traditionally alternates with the German Evangelischer Kirchentag, the Lutheran equivalent, and hence takes place every second year in a different diocese that is hosting the event. While the event is called Catholic's Day, it actually lasts several days and usually attracts thousands of people who are interested in a dialogue of church and public life. Father Joe, you have recently participated in this Katholikentag in Würzburg, and must have been the first one for you. How would you describe these days for you from your perspective as a New Zealander?
Yeah, it's the second one that I've been to. The first one was 20 years ago. But it was interesting. We had in the theology faculty, we had 6 liturgy workshops with experimental liturgies, and we had 4 theology workshops. So there was a huge number of people. Würzburg was overfilled with people. It was hard to get a place on the streetcar, and it was a very good atmosphere. So I think the Catholic days wouldn't be possible, I don't think, in New Zealand, because I think it takes you need a bulk of people. And so Germany, with its millions of Catholics and millions of baptized people who are interested in the public life of the church, that is very small in New Zealand. And then, of course, finances and the organization. It took 2 years to organize this Katholikentag. So the group that are responsible for it from the Bishops' Conference moved into a building close to the faculty, and they rented it, and they rented rooms, and they were there on and off for 2 years. And then the thing goes to the next place, which is Paderborn. It's a result of the history of Germany, the political, religious history, social history of Germany on the one side. It's the fact that the German church is very wealthy and can afford it through the church tax, and so it can afford the organization. And then I think it's the other thing, which is the political reality, where the politicians want to speak to Catholics and to Protestants or Lutherans, etc. They want that for the CDU and for the SPD, the Social Democrats and the Christian Democratic parties. These are a constituency that they actually want to talk to.
Yeah, and you just mentioned the history. The Kirchentag, the first Kirchentag was set up in 1848, so about 180 years old. So it has a long tradition, and it has also a certain structure that has developed over the decades. And so that seems to have proven to work, but it could also be seen as a bit too rigid. At the same time, I think it is important to consider that there is a big focus on Catholic laity of all walks of life. How would you describe the role of the clergy, and especially the role of the bishops at these events?
Okay, so that's where I think, just to go a step back, the history that you've brought about there, 1848, the whole thing of democracy coming into Germany, the beginning of the unification of Germany, etc., and it was a lay movement, and very powerful that the bishops stayed out of it in about the first 70 years anyway. And then when you track the pictures, you can see there are no bishops to begin with, and then at a certain stage, before and after the Second World War, there's a whole group of bishops sitting in the front row. And now it's not bishop dominated. It's still very much lay dominated, and the bishops play a role in that organization. But really, I listened to four bishops talking, and they were not as impressive in what they had to say as the lay members were. That I got the distinct impression that the bishops, and it's probably true in lots of dioceses around the church, they are trying to keep a system alive that is dying bit by bit around them, but they don't know what to do next, or they don't have the courage to take the next steps. And you get this certain frustration coming in between laity who are saying, why don't you just do this, or trust us, or allow us in and we'll help you solve it? And the bishops are going, well, not really, please, we'll solve it on ourselves. And so,
You're talking about the bishops in Germany, which have a reputation that they are more forward-thinking than many other bishops in the world.
yeah, most of them are, but not all of them are, that's for
Mm.
sure. And not all of them came, of course. But I think there is. I think there's a real tension there between the what the bishops add to the conversation and what the laity add to the conversation. And so Katholikentag is an opportunity for these two voices to come into dialogue. It struck me as being very political, more than I had understood from the first time. And I came away with a second thought. Now I understand better the synodal path, or the synodal way that was adopted in Germany, which I think a lot of other countries have not understood, because this lay movement that is behind Katholikentag is so intrinsic to the way that the German church operates.
Can you give us
And
an example of where you really saw it, like a speech or a topic or a person? Can you give us some example?
yeah, so the federal president came, and he said, it's not a secret. Everybody knows that I'm a Lutheran, and Katholikentag is really important for the whole of Germany. Then he said some comments that supported um, Pope Leo in the way that he's doing. And this is the president of the Federal Republic. I mean, he's not there in a private capacity.
The
But
Federal
then I
Republic of
heard
Germany.
of
Okay.
Germany, yeah, yeah. And so he was there. Friedrich Merz was there, the Chancellor. Markus Söder, who's the Minister President or the Governor of the state of Bavaria, was there. And lots of other politicians were there. And so you get a very powerful burst of energy. But I just felt that most of the bishops couldn't equal the energy of the presentations given by the president, his very clear articulation of international problems. And then there was another point at the closing mass where a woman who was in charge of the German Bible Society, or Bibelwerk, she gave before each of the readings what I can only describe as excellent brief little homilies telling us what the reading was about. When the bishop, Wilmer, he's going to become the new bishop of Münster and the president of the conference, when he came to give his homily, it was just so flat in comparison. So that when this woman spoke, she was interrupted by applause
Wow.
as she was giving her. Now, Vilma had got a couple of bouts of applause as well, but there was nothing coming out of them like, here's a vision for the future, and this is where it's going, and these are the things that we're tackling. It, so really, I found it very interesting. Then a couple of other places where I were, bishops trying to explain why we are now dealing here with pastoral areas, why parishes are being closed, and people saying, this is impacting on me where I am. I'm willing to do this. And then, so, and then you hear somebody, there was a young woman who was from the Diocese of Rothenburg, Stuttgart, and she's been given permission to celebrate baptisms because the reason is lack of clergy. Um, I don't actually think that's the problem, but her enthusiasm for being a celebrant of baptism with families in a pastoral area just was so dynamic, yeah? And then you compare it to the clergy who just sound so washed out. So I think there's a huge issue there, yeah? And
Do you think that the clergy also realize the difference that they might learn from the energy and the spirit? I mean, not in general, but so
yeah,
those who are not experienced, who are not so energetic, do you think that they would realize that some lay people are really energetic and just learn from them? Do you think that could be the case?
I suppose so, yeah. I mean, not all clergy are the same, so
Yeah,
everybody
correct.
responds differently, and not all contexts are the same. Having said all of that, I think there is probably mm, there's more energy among many of the lay people to do things because they don't care about the hierarchical system as much, or they're not in it. And therefore they're much more light on their feet and faster to respond. And you get the sense of the clergy who are in this hierarchical system, who've been trained in it, brought up in it, and they think hierarchically. And that's where they come into conflict with the laity, because laity don't think necessarily hierarchically. So you give another word for it, clericalism. I don't like the word clericalism. I think this hierarchical thinking is the problem. And so you find laity who think hierarchically, clergy who don't. But I think you find the majority of clergy and bishops think hierarchically.
Mhm.
And they're thinking about saving the system we've got, which is a Tridentine system. It's built up over the last 500 years, and it's good, but it just doesn't work.
Mhm.
And the whole notion of the parish doesn't work. The notion of the parish priest doesn't work, but all of the canon law is written around the hierarchical reality of the parish and the parish priest. And so, because these are givens in the construct of thinking, when you find somebody who comes, a layperson often, who comes and says, look, just chuck it all in the bin, let me do the baptisms, and everybody will be happy. And it's like, oh, wait a minute.
And don't forget that you're a priest yourself. So you're not just speaking about the situation, but you're also in the middle of it, aren't you?
Yes, because I operate here. I work in the faculty, but I also work in a parish, and I see it there that we had a meeting today because we're in a pastoral area, and the pastoral area doesn't function that well because the pastoral area is hierarchically constructed, but it does classic things. It cuts across community um, structures, the local community where people go to buy their bread and how they understand. So what they've done in our area is they've put part of the city, which has an urban understanding of itself, parishes, and some parishes which are rural, put it all together into one, and then wondering why it doesn't work.
Some time ago, you said it's always good to have smaller communities where the people know each other. And I think Thomas O'Loughlin always says 150 people is what you know well.
And I think the difference is too, and it came up in our discussions at the Katholikentag, that it's easy enough to put the administration at one level.
Mhm.
Anything that can be done in finances or computers or telephones or whatever, that can be done for huge areas by a group of people sitting somewhere in an office. That's not the problem. But we tend to drag that in as if it's the most important thing. The more difficult thing, the fundamentally difficult thing, is to have three or four different, what I call parishes or faith communities, however you want to name them, places where people gather to worship on a Sunday. And they have different characteristics.
Mhm.
They have different characters. And so I often talk about the different face. And that's where you can blend some things together and some things you can't. In my experience, I've made some mistakes there, and other times it's been successful, but it takes time. Um, and so I think going back to the Katholikentag and looking at its opportunity, the opportunity is certainly that it is a time and a space where Catholics who are interested in the church come together. The the age group was quite noticeably older, and the younger people were there. So the scouts, the Catholic Scout movement was there and very present, and it was doing some marvelous stuff in a church just across the street from us. Just about all of the churches in Würzburg were used for something, and constantly. It was an amazing amount of organization that went into it. But in general, it wasn't like Youth Day. It didn't have that sort of vibe. And and I wonder, if you could bring Youth Day and Katholikentag then together, what sort of um, thing you would have. But of course, the other side of it too is that a lot of younger Catholics are much more conservative than their parents or their grandparents. And so the younger ones want to run off and have adoration all the time because it's a very simple, it's a me and Jesus moment. It's pure piety and pietism. But when it comes to social action on things like um, gay rights or refugees or these sorts of things, then they are often politically quite conservative.
I also remember that there were a lot of groups that were to do with reaching out to other communities, to the poor of the communities, the marginalized, and also outreach worldwide. And that's where remember that the fair trade and all of this, aren't they
Yeah.
these areas where the youth could get very much involved, or were they involved in this? What was your impression?
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
I know that some of the younger groups that were there focused on, like I said, Eucharistic adoration, although the scouts were there and they were doing there was also worship-based stuff that
Mhm.
they were doing. There was a thing called the Church Mile, and so you could visit all of the tents along the Main River. And so you've got,
Like
um,
an exhibition.
well, yeah, it was amazing. Like you just walk through, and so you've got Catholics for Afghanistan, and then you've got Catholic Jewish dialogue, and then you've got something like here are the women priests movement, and here are the women against the women priests movement, and it was very very colorful in the sense, and so that's also good because that shows, to use the bigger word of Catholicos, it gives the universality of the church. And so, as Pope Francis would say, tutti, 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 everybody, and the doors are open. So you got this other sense that to be Catholic means to be inclusive of a whole lot of points of view.
And it's not
And
just uniform because you have all the different movements within the Catholic Church.
yeah, that's right. And so my point of view is only one point of view. And so there were 70,000 people there. So you get 70,000 different points of view. And that's good.
Yeah.
But what struck me really was the way that it was very political. It was interested in the politics of Germany, and not just internal, but also external, and that there was a desire for a real conversation. And the politicians came. I can't imagine in New Zealand if there was a Catholic 3 days or something where everything was done, that most of the politicians, New Zealand politicians, would turn up. And if they did, I think the New Zealand thing would be much more antagonistic.
And I
Whereas,
when I remember going to interfaith events here or in the last years in New Zealand, the politicians who come two interfaith events, they come and give a speech and then they leave again. It's not, they are not sitting down with critical people and discussing, at least what I've seen so far. I can't speak for every situation, but I
Mm.
think I remember the politicians sitting down, and I think one of the discussions that Merz had with the young people was
Yeah.
even brought to the attention of other countries because of the comments he
Yes.
made.
Yeah. And there were some disruptors there in the event.
Mhm.
And so they had to be dealt with, and that was a problem. But he was having a meeting with young people, and they were very forthright in what they had to say to him. And it's not to him necessarily as Friedrich Merz, but it's to him as the Bundeskanzler,
Mhm.
as the representative of this federal government, which is facing enormous challenges in so many different areas, in health and welfare, in the reform of social care. It was interesting to see all of that. And then I was standing in this Catholic mile as Mr. Merz and his entourage went through. I've never seen so many police in one place, and all heavily armed. So it was something which was very serious, It's like it's obviously a very important meeting place for German political elites and in this instance German Catholics to be together.
And
And
Joe, you are specialized also in liturgy also. Do you think you can take anything from the Katholikentag away for your expertise in experimental liturgy?
yeah, we had a couple of things. So we had a click and pray liturgy, which wasn't as fully digitized as one had hoped because the German church is not as digitized as the New Zealand church is. You won't find um, a data projector with a screen. And so one lady said to me, as I was standing there in my Alban stole, she said, I thought it was going to be digital. And I said, well, I'm analog today. But it was good. And we used a Mentimeter to get the prayers. They did that also at the final mass. The final mass had great jazz music too. And in one, we used Green Up Liturgy, which I did, and it used some elements from New Zealand, from the Porphyry, with two women, one welcoming the other in, etc., and a little group going with her. And then to express to people that through the mountains and the rivers being spoken to and spoken about, and the land and the rest of it, you can bring creation into a liturgy without having to make it seem odd, whatever. So yeah, there were some good ideas. There was also the church that we used, which is the faculty church, is designed by Martin Stuflesser, and it's in the shape of a oval. The people seat around altar and lectern facing one another. And so that was absolutely amazing for the people who visited it because most people are still at home in the liturgical bus with the bus driver at the front at the altar and the lectern in his chair and never moving, and everybody sitting in their seats facing in one direction. And all very good if you want to celebrate the 1962 missal, because that's the idea, everybody's facing in the same direction. But when you're trying to have a sense of worship which is communitarian, in which the community gathers around the two foci, the altar and of the word and the altar of the Eucharist, then you've got to actually have a venue that does that, a church which is designed that way. So that worked very well. And then came away with music is so important and music is generational. And so standing for the two big masses on the Residenzplatz, one where it was all rained out and the other was beautiful weather, uh, the community of the people around me, whom I didn't even know, but one comes into conversation with them or one shares an umbrella with somebody who you don't know. That also builds community. And so I think it's quite amazing, yeah.
It would be nice to do something in other countries. Also, it could be a smaller one. There was the Word of God Symposium in New Zealand in 2012, which was like a miniature of the Katholikentag without the political elements.
Yeah. And there've been Catholic days and there've been various things that have happened in New Zealand. But on this scale, I don't think I don't think I would ever see it in New Zealand. I'm not sure it would be possible. And also, there's lots of other things that go with it. For instance, just being able to travel around the country by train so that, thousands and thousands of people can arrive by train from all over Germany. And then there are hotels, and then there were people, my neighbor here, an elderly woman in her 70s, a member of the local parish. She had 3 other women from the Diocese of Essen staying with her for the 5 days. And so lots and lots of people gave hospitality. And
Hmm.
so I think all of those elements build the Katholikentag. So they're building communities, they're building connection and relationships.
I think that's a really important point, this hospitality, because then people, even if they might not attend the Katholikentag, with having visitors from the Katholikentag, they will talk about it and they get engaged. And the more people are in private houses, the more conversation you have. And also on the buses in the city, usually it's easy to meet with people. And I remember one sister was saying that because in Germany there were habits, so when she was getting on the bus, there were young people approaching her and asking her questions about her religious life. And she said it was just amazing.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah, and in in the city itself, there was a great vibe.
Yeah.
People were respectful and they were happy, and there were a few incidents from people who had planned to have an incident, but generally it all went off so well. It went very, very well.
What last sentence can you say about the Katholikentag? Something to sum it all up?
Well, I think the Katholikentag, Germany would be very, very different church without it.
Yeah.
And I think in order to understand the German church and understand the German approach to the synodal way and everything, you have to understand the Katholikentag, its history, its background, and its purpose.
Thank you so much, Father Joe, for this insight of the Katholikentag and greetings back to Germany.
Thank you. Thank you, Beata.
Out there, heroic peace is calling. In the bonds of love we meet. For the world, a new day dawning and shine.